Good day, you nine. I hope that you are all safe and well at home. We are going to be continuing our lesson. This is week 4, lesson number 2. We're going to be continuing our journey on the digestive system. So last lesson we looked at the human digestive system and the parts of it and what they did. Today we're going to be focusing more on the chemistry of food. So you will have done in Key Stage 3 about the different food groups, and you also will have done the food tests, which are actually a required practical for GCSE. So when we get to that section of this lesson, I will be asking you to exit this video, go to a different video which shows that required practical, and it will actually be with Miss Moore and Miss Nixon, so you won't have to listen to my voice. And take down the necessary notes. But you can do that when we get there. Right, so to get our brains in gears and remember what we did last lesson, you don't have to write this down, but on the slide you can see that there is the part of the human digestive system, and hopefully you've realised that they are not in the correct order. So I'd like you to pause the video and put those in the correct order. As I say, you don't need to write this down. Okay, brilliant. So hopefully we have got this order. So you've got the mouth to begin with, that's the same. Then you've got the gullet or the esophagus. Then you have got the stomach, which is followed by the small intestine, then the large intestine, then the rectum, and then the anus. Okay, so what we're going to be looking at, there's 3 main food groups that you need to know about in detail, which are the carbohydrates, the proteins, and the lipids, which you might be more familiar with as being referred to as fats. So what we need to be able to do is recall what foods contain those different things. We need to be able to describe the structure of some of the simple sugars, starch, lipids, and proteins. And then for the highest level, we're explaining which food molecules are polymers. Now, polymers comes up in chemistry where you have got small units that are joined together to make larger units. And those smaller units are called monomers. And then the larger unit is polymer. So poly means many. So polymers are made of monomers. Right, so to start off with, again, you do not need to write this unless you want to. We've got some different parts of a balanced diet, pictures of different parts of a balanced diet from A to G. Can you have a think about what the function what each part is from A to G, and then what the function is for A to D, just the top row. What do we need those things for? Okay, so pause the video and do that. Right, so hopefully we were able to get some of these. Don't worry if you didn't get all of these. This is something from year 8, from Key Stage 3. So if there is any that you were unfamiliar with, then you might want to pop them down. But we are going to go into more detail about A, C, and D. Okay. So what is the function? Hopefully you remember, but if not, pop down or not. It does come up in a late slide. Protein, it's very, very important because that's all about repairing our body. Minerals for B, same as F in vitamins. Vitamins and minerals are really important at coming together with other compounds to be able to do specific tasks. So for instance, iron, we need iron. That's really important in our red blood cells because it attracts oxygen. C, hopefully we got as carbohydrates, and that's the food groups that gives us our energy. D is the lipids or the fats, and that's very important. That gives us energy. It's also very important at keeping us warm, things like that. E is fibre, or roughage, and that's very important in pushing everything through the system. F is vitamins, we've already said that one, and G is water, which is also obviously very important, as most of us is made of water. Okay, so this will be new information for most of you. Metabolic rate does come up in another topic that you'll be doing at another point as well. So how much energy a person requires depends on who they are. Okay, and it's all to do with something that you've probably heard of, the metabolism, the metabolic rate. And you will need to put this definition down. Metabolic rate is the speed at which all of the chemical reactions take place in the body. So a lot of people always think it's just respiration, because we know that respiration gives us energy, but the metabolic rate is all of the chemical reactions, not just respiration. We need energy to fuel these chemical reactions, so that's where respiration comes into play. Therefore, if there are more reactions taking place, then you need more energy. So there will be a higher metabolic rate. So the more you are doing, the higher your metabolic rate. So if you need to pause the video to put down what metabolic rate is in the red box, then please do so now. Okay, so we're going to be talking about those three main food groups that I said about, which are the carbohydrates, the proteins, and the lipids. We're going to go through each one, and you will want to take notes on what they contain, so what is in those molecules. You'll want some examples, 2 or 3 examples of where you'll find that group, and also what they're for. So we'll start. Okay, so there are 3 main food groups that we need to know about. We need to know what they're for, where we get them from in our diet, and also what they're made from. We're going to start with carbohydrates. Now, carbohydrates are really important because they are what we mainly use to get our energy from in that process called respiration. And from one of our first lessons, hopefully we know the structure in the cell where respiration takes place. It begins with an M. It's a long word. Hopefully we said mitochondria. Now, we get most of our carbohydrates in our diet from things like bread and pasta and rice, potatoes and wheat. So what I suggest in your notes is you have the title carbohydrates, if you haven't already done this, say what it's used for, and maybe put down a couple of examples of where we get it from. I would suggest picking ones that you're more familiar with, perhaps where you get most of your carbohydrates from, because then you're more likely to remember. Now, carbohydrates contain 3 different elements: carbon, hydrogen and oxygen, hence why they're called carbohydrates. Carbo for carbon, hydra for the hydrogen, and if you see a word in science that ends in -ates, then it tends to mean oxygen. So sulfates are sulfur and oxygen, carbonates are carbon and oxygen. Carbohydrates, we kind of tend to put them into 2 main categories. So you have complex carbohydrates, and we tend to call the building blocks of those just simple sugars. So if we look at the picture in the middle, you'll see, and you don't need to write down any of these, you don't need to worry about the words monosaccharide, disaccharide, polysaccharide, that's A level. You do need to know that monomers are the things that build polymers, and monomers of carbohydrates are things like glucose, fructose, which is the sugar we find in fruit, galactose, which is the sugar in milk. So glucose, fructose and galactose, they're the monomers. They are the single units, and they join together and they make complex carbohydrates. So in the picture, the bit where it says polysaccharide, that would be an example of a complex carbohydrate. Now, complex carbohydrates that you'll be familiar with are starch, which comes from plants. That's where we get a lot of our energy from. And cellulose as well, which is what makes plant cell walls. And what we refer to as simple sugars, that's just one monomer on its own. Now, you don't need to worry about any of the pictures that are in the middle in terms of knowing the structures of all the hydrogens and oxygens and carbons, but I would suggest learning that the formula for glucose is C6H12O6, purely because it comes up in many other topics where you do have to know it, so you may as well start having a go trying to remember it now. Okay, we're going to move on to proteins next. So if you want to make any notes, pause the video now for carbohydrates, and then push play and we'll move on to proteins. Okay, so proteins. Proteins are really important because they are what help us grow. So when you are between 0 and 18, you're obviously growing. You need protein in order to do that. You need it to repair cells with damage to cells and also replace them. So when we're doing the topic on cell division, that would involve a lot of protein. You need a lot of protein in order to make new cells. Now, where do we get most of our protein from? You can probably tell by the picture on the left-hand side. Things like eggs and fish and meat, but also cheese and milk. And for any vegans, beans and pulses will also contain protein. Now, protein has got carbon, hydrogen and oxygen like carbohydrates, but in proteins you'll also find nitrogen. Okay, so that's what makes it different to carbohydrates, because it also contains nitrogen. Proteins are the building blocks of life. So at the bottom you can see some of the functions of proteins. It's needed for structure transport, enzymes, which are a big thing in this chapter. You'll do more about that later on this week. Antibodies, you might have heard about antibodies in the news recently. That's to do with your immune system. And also hormones, so testosterone, estrogen, insulin, another big chapter that you'll do later on in biology. All of those are proteins. And proteins, like with the carbohydrates, the complex carbohydrates being made up of simple sugars, proteins are also built up of these monomers, and they're built up by amino acids. And there's about 20 different types of amino acids, and depending on what combination you have, will give you different proteins. Okay, now I've skipped quickly onto lipids. Sorry about that. So if you want to pause now, or in fact rewind this video a bit and take some notes from the protein one. Remember, we need to know what it's for, where we get it from, and what it's made of, what makes it unique. Right, we'll move on to lipids then. Lipids, or fats, are also really, really important and used for a variety of different things. So we need them in our membranes, so our cell membranes will all contain lipids. We do use them for energy as well. We also have them as thermal insulation, so to keep warm. Protective layers. Also, we use it in our neurons or our nerve cells. That myelinated sheath, you might remember, going around the neuron, that keeps the electrical signal in. And also lipids are in some of the hormones. Now, we get it a lot in our diets from butter, different oils, so olive oil, vegetable oil. We get it from margarine as well. You can get a lot of lipids in avocados, coconuts, seeds, cheese, cream as well. Now, they contain the elements carbon, hydrogen and oxygen, which I'm sure you realise is the same as carbohydrates, but they're arranged slightly differently. Now, lipids tend to have two forms that you'll be familiar with. Fats, so those are the solid lipids, so that's butter, cheese, lard. The oils will tend to be talking about the liquid, so olive oil, vegetable oil, sunflower oil, things like that. All of them are insoluble in water. They do not dissolve in water. That's why if you put oil and water together, they form two different layers. Now, this is what makes them different to carbohydrates, because instead of being made up of lots of repeating monomers, they're actually made up of a glycerol and then 3 fatty acid chains that come off it. Glycerol will always be there, but the fatty acids chains can be different. Sometimes you only have 2 of them, but in most of them you have got 3. Sorry about the bell. Most of them you will have 3. So lipids are made up of a glycerol and 3 fatty acids. Okay, we are going to have a little quiz now. It looks like a really big quiz, but you don't need to write down the answers unless you want to, just to make sure you don't forget them. I'll read through them and then we'll go through the answers. So question 1. Which food contains carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen and oxygen? 2. Which food group is made up of a glycerol and fatty acids? Number 3. Which food groups contain carbon, hydrogen and oxygen? Number 4. Which food group is needed for energy, where we get most of our energy from? Number 5. Which food group is made of amino acids? Number 6. Name some foods that contain carbohydrates. Maybe pop down 2 different foods that contain carbohydrates. Number 7. Which food group is needed for growth, repair and replacement? Number 8. Name some foods that contain lipids. So again, maybe 2 different examples of foods that contain lipids. Number 9, which food group is also used in structure for transport, makes enzymes, makes antibodies, and most of the hormones? Number 10, which food group is made up of simple sugars? Number 11, name some foods that contain proteins. So again, give 2 examples. And finally, number 12, which food group is used in membranes for energy, thermal insulation, so keeping you warm, protective layers, electrical insulation in neurons, and some hormones? Okay, so if you did write them down, we're going to go over the answers now so you can tick them off. If you didn't write them down, then obviously you'll know in your head whether you got it right or wrong. I would suggest that if you have it wrong, that you add an additional note into that section of your notes. So, number 1, which food contains carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen? That is protein. Number 2, glycerol and fatty acids are in lipids. Number 3, which food groups contain carbon, hydrogen, oxygen? That should be carbohydrates and lipids. Number 4, which used for energy? Carbohydrates, but you could have put lipids as well. Number 5, amino acids are in protein. Number 6, foods that contain carbohydrates, bread, pasta, sugar. You might put wheat or rice, any of those. Number 7, which food group is needed for growth, repair and replacement? That is protein. Number 8, name some foods that contain lipids. So meat, cheese, nuts, cream, butter. Number 9, which food group is also used in structure, etc. That is protein. Number 10, which food group is made up of sugar? That's the carbohydrates. Number 11, some foods that contain protein, meat, fish, cheese, pulses, beans, any of those. Number 12, which food group is used in membranes, energy supply, etc.? That is the lipids. Okay, so what we're going to do now is this would be the point in the lesson where we'd start doing about the required practical, so how we can test for these different food groups. And you need to know the test for starch, which is a complex carbohydrate, glucose, which is a simple sugar. You need to know the test for lipids, and you need to know the test for proteins. Now, I have put in the show my homework a link to Miss Moore, who goes through these food tests. But what you need to know is on this slide. So as you're going through this, please make sure that you are following the success criteria for grades 1 to 4. You need to describe how to test for each of those things, how you would do it safely. So as it's happening, how would you do it safely? For 5 to 6, you need to put all of your results into a table. And also you need to know the methods for testing them. And for the top levels, for 7, 8s and 9s, you need to suggest what item food contains those different foods. If you're given a random one, so if you were given a burger, a cheeseburger, what you would do to know what food groups it contains. So you're going to exit this video now, and you are going to go onto the link that will take you to the practical, and you are going to make sure that you have got all of those things in your notes. You can then come back to this video because there's another little test yourself, 4 questions, which you can have a go at to see how much you have taken on. Okay, so if you exit the video now, go to the link, and I'll be here when you come back after watching that. Okay, so the last thing from me is just these 4 questions. So question number 1, state what a protein is and describe how they're used in the body. And it's going to be worth 3 marks. So you're obviously going to get a mark for saying what a protein is in the exam. And then the other 2 marks are going to be how they're used. So you need to make sure that you're going to put 2 different uses of protein. Question number 2, describe the main similarities and differences between the 3 main groups of chemicals, carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids. Now, this would probably be worth more 6 marks in the exam. I put 4 marks on there just so you're picking up where you're going to get marks from. Please make sure that if you're asked to describe similarities and differences, that you are doing both of those things, not just what makes them the same or what makes them different. Question number 3 I'd like you to have a go at is explain why lipids can either be fats or oils. Now for this question, it's probably, it might be thinking it's quite hard to get 3 marks on that, but it is just asking about the difference between them, but what they both contain. Number 4, explain how simple sugars are related to complex carbohydrates, and that is going to be worth 3 marks. So we need to make sure we've got 3 key points in there. So you're going to pause the video, have a go at answering those, making sure you've got that many points in for each question, and then you will be self-assessing afterwards. Okay, so hopefully you've had a go at that. Grab a different coloured pen and we can go through and see if you picked up some marks. So question number 1 was state what a protein is and describe how they're used in the body. And I put 4 options on there. So a protein is a molecule made up of amino acids. So if you've mentioned amino acids, being made of amino acids, that's going to be a mark. You could have said that they're made in structural components, 1 mark. Hormones would be a mark. Enzymes would be a mark. You've talked about they're used in repairing cells, that also would be a mark, or cell division, replacing cells, any of those. Question number 2 is describe the main similarities and differences between the 3 groups. So a similarity that you might have mentioned is that all of them are needed in our diet. So we need all 3 of those. All of them contained carbon, hydrogen and oxygen. All of them were larger molecules that are made up of smaller ones. So you might have said they're polymers, they're made up of monomers. That's fine. For the differences, you might have talked about how carbohydrates are made of sugars, whereas lipids are made of fatty acids and glycerol, and proteins are made of amino acids, but you would have to talk about all of those to get the point. You might have said that lipids are insoluble in water. You might have said that proteins contain nitrogen. Any one of those are just some examples. Any of those will be worth a mark. Number 3 was explain why lipids can either be fats or oils. So all lipids are made up of glycerol and fatty acids. And depending on which fatty acids it has, will determine if it's a solid, which we refer to as fats, or a liquid, which we refer to as oils. Finally, number 4 was explain how simple sugars are related to complex carbohydrates. So hopefully it said that complex carbohydrates are made of lots of simple sugars, that they're joined together would be a mark, and that simple sugars are the basic units or the monomer of carbohydrates. That is it from me for this lesson. Hopefully we know those 3 main molecules, carbohydrates, proteins and lipids. Hopefully we know where we get them from. Hopefully we know what they're needed for. And hopefully we know some differences and similarities of what they're made of. As I say, you will have done the required practical. That is an important practical. So hopefully we're also able to describe those tests, those different food tests, and what they mean. Okay, well done for accessing this lesson. You'll hear from me in the next lesson. Take care of yourselves and have a good day. Thank you very much.